everybody, Fantasticairy here, back with another video. In this week's video, I went out and kind of explored the forest a little bit here in September. The leaves have been changing and it's been very beautiful. I was inspired by these scenes to paint a birch tree in kind of a meadow of grass, like this one here. I kind of use this one as my reference. I start off by wetting the page in the composition of the area I want to paint. I add in my greens, of course using my light values, working light to dark, but I just kind of want to establish my overall color theme for this composition first. Using a mix of my sap green and blending it with some purple just to get it a little bit more dark, but still keeping it very watered down so that it's not too thick. And I'm going to be using my flat shader brush for the majority of this painting. I wiped off a little bit of the paint in the center just to make sure I have a silhouette for my birch tree. And then I'm going to add in some drops of yellow, get those fall colors in with the green, using the wet on wet technique and letting everything blend together naturally. With landscape painting, you really do have to trust the process. I love using flathead brushes for landscape paintings. You get really cool brush techniques, and it makes you be more careful with how you hold the brush too. And then using the tip of my shader brush to dot in even some more saturated green, a little bit thicker in value, but still very light. And I'm going to do some orange as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Deviating from my original reference, as I always do, to make it look a little bit more stylistic. Moving on to the tree. Wasn't sure how I was going to tackle the leaves for this one, so I just kind of went in and dotted in some specks of paint. Using some yellow for the changing leaves. I'm going to go back to the bark and I'm going to start shaping in the bark of the birch tree. The tree I was referencing was more of a grayish black, but I wanted to use like a brown for the birch bark. And of course keeping some white in there to make sure that it's noticeable that it's a birch tree. Kind of just letting the paint dry naturally and experimenting with where I want to put certain areas of darker and lighter for the trunk. Now I'm going to tackle the branches, kind of using the very edge of my shader brush, using thicker to thinner lines. I could have used my fine liner brush for this, but I wanted to stick to the theme of my flathead shader brush to see what I could get and to challenge myself a little bit using just one brush until later on when I detail with my very tiny brush. I'm being careful not to add too much contrast to some areas because I don't want to lose those white areas of the birch tree. And now I'm going to go in and take my 0.5 tiny round brush to dot in the greens of the leaves. I could have kept using my shader brush, but I wanted to get more of a defined circular look, so I swapped brushes. And then I'm going to go in with some orange as well. Usually birch trees, their leaves change more of a yellow, but I thought adding the orange would give it a little bit more interesting characteristics. And I'm using my stipple brush here to kind of play around to see if I can get this leaf effect for the tree to fill in the canopy a little bit more. Going back down to the ground level to add in some plants and grass using my shader brush. Kind of get like these thick stems with the shader brush. Continuing my theme of adding in orange and yellows, just make sure the palette flows well with the composition. And then I'm going to dot in some darker colored little leaves for the grass. Let them all blend naturally with the wet on wet technique, giving some more interesting shapes for the ground level. I really love this brush for small details, especially when I paint so small. I can also define a little bit more of the branches, adding in a few more twigs here and there with a little bit more of a darker brown. And then I'm just going to add some finer details in these blades of grass with my fine liner 01, defining the ground level areas just a little bit more. And here's the final result. You definitely have to trust the process as everything will come together in the end. I'm really happy with how this composition turned out. The colors are very representational of the September autumn themes going on where I live right now. I really love the season of autumn. I believe it is my favorite season. So capturing the colors in a sketchbook is very magical in a way. I think my favorite part about this composition would be the bark of the birch tree. I also love how the colors work well together in the canopy and the ground level. I think next time my focus will be to define the canopy of a tree a little bit more and to add even more interesting details for the ground level. Also play around with how to tackle certain leaves for trees and different ways to paint them so that I get that watercolor stylistic feel in the end. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Videos are every Friday. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you for your comments as always. You can find me on the social medias and the link in the description below, as well as my imprint shop if you're interested in purchasing any prints and stickers. I'll be happy to share with you guys this full page full of little forest scenes. Hopefully next week I can get to that. And yeah, okay guys, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye!